On the topic of effective enforcement of the law, I rise today as well on a related topic, which is the quality of our judiciary. Again, our laws are only as effective as the judges who implement them. And here I rise with regret because the administration is attempting to radically reshape our judiciary, to remake the bench in the image of a far-right dogma that basically contravenes what we are and where we are as a nation. This administration has proposed extreme nominees who will seek to undo decades of critically important progress in recognizing and protecting reproductive rights, LGBT rights, voting rights, workers' rights, environmental protections, and more. For the last 10 months, this administration has tried its level best to move our country backward by implementing its destructive, deeply unpopular agenda. They want to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. They want to abandon LGBT Americans. They want to make it harder to vote, harder to organize, harder to breathe clean air, and drink clean water. And if they fall short in carrying out this cruel agenda through executive action and legislation, this administration has looked to the courts to do its dirty work. The Trump administration seeks to flood the federal judiciary with judges appointed for life who will defend their indefensible goals. This plot is not hidden. It's not secret. It's out in the open. President Trump has made it clear. He claims to have a litmus test for Supreme Court nominees. He will nominate someone who will, quote, automatically, end quote, overturn Roe v. Wade. Just last month, the Senate voted to confirm 2 Circuit Court nominees, Allison Ayed and Joan Larson, who have been listed by then-candidate Trump as potential Supreme Court nominees, indicating that they have passed that litmus test. When I asked both of these nominees whether their record would lead someone to believe that they would, quote, automatically, end quote, reverse Roe v. Wade, they both demurred. They said they didn't know why they were selected for President Trump's Supreme Court shortlist. No idea. I don't believe it. Then candidate Trump laid out his Supreme Court selection criteria in clear, unambiguous terms. Yesterday, we heard testimony from a Circuit Court nominee, Justice Don Willett of the Texas Supreme Court, who proudly described himself in 2012 as, quote, the consensus conservative choice from every corner of the conservative movement, pro-life, pro-faith, pro-family, pro-liberty, pro-Second Amendment, pro-private property rights, and pro-limited government, end quote. That's the way he described himself. And when I asked him what he meant by tying himself to these labels, he refused to give me a straight answer. In fact, he said, in effect, he was just pandering to the public for votes. That was part of his re-election pitch. Maybe he didn't believe it. But we've all been around long enough to know what these terms mean to voters and what they mean to the President of the United States. They aren't dog whistles, literally, but they represent specific ideologies. They are shorthand for specific dogma. I have no confidence that Justice Willett will be an impartial and objective implementer of the law and enforcer of the measures that we pass here. Just last week, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance Brett Talley. He is someone who wrote that the solution to the Newtown shooting, he wrote it 3 days after that massacre, is to, quote, stop being a society of pansies and man up, end quote. He is someone who has written that the country, quote, overreacted, end quote, and that, quote, the Second Amendment suffered, end quote, after the murder of 20 children and 6 adults in Newtown. One of the great tragedies of this country in recent years, and his reaction was that the Second Amendment suffered. Someone who has disingenuously written that Democrats want to take away everyone's guns, even setting aside the fact that he has never tried a case in his career, is someone who should be nowhere near the bench, at least as a judge. I hope my Republican colleagues will revisit their decision to support him. And I want to emphasize, the compromise that we have reached today and that we are introducing in this bipartisan group takes away no one's guns if they are law-abiding and otherwise comply with the law. In fact, it provides incentives and rewards to states that do better reporting. It makes sure that a robust reporting system preventing the sales of firearms to people who are a danger to themselves or others, including convicted domestic abusers, never takes place. And so this exaggeration, distortion, misinformation from Mr. Talley, I think, is emblematic of what kind of judge he would be. Let us not forget that we are, in fact, judged by the company we keep. President Trump is willing to nominate someone like Jeff Mattier to a lifetime appointment on the Federal District Court, the Eastern District of Texas. He wasn't on the docket this week, but he could well come before the Senate Judiciary for a hearing in coming weeks. This is someone who has called transgender children, quote, Satan's plan. He has proudly said, quote, on the basis of sexual orientation, we discriminate, end quote. He has advocated conversion therapy for LGBT children. With these nominations, President Trump has shown the type of person he is willing to propose for lifetime appointments on the district courts as well as the Court of Appeals. And as someone who has practiced in the district courts of Connecticut and others around the country, as well as courts of appeals in the Second Circuit and elsewhere, these appointments have special meaning to me and to others who are well-versed in the way our justice system works. For many people in this country, the United States District Court is the first place they seek justice. They rely on federal judges to be above politics, to be above personal ideology and dogma of the right or the left wing. The United States District Courthouse is the first place they seek justice, and for many, it is the last place. An adverse ruling for them is often the end of the line because they lack the resources to pursue an appeal to the circuit court. Our district court judges are often the voice and face of justice that the people of the United States most trust and rely on. What we see in these nominees is a pattern. They have clearly demonstrated through their actions, their statements, their temperament, their character, that they are simply unfit and unable to serve as an impartial judge, especially when it comes to our nation's most vulnerable communities. Our nation's most vulnerable communities are the ones who often rely the most on those federal courts. There can be no benefit of the doubt for nominees when they articulate the kinds of beliefs and dogma that these individuals have in their past and refuse to disavow many of them in the present. I will oppose them. I hope my colleagues will join me. I believe that on both sides of the aisle, we share a commitment to the credibility and trust of our judiciary. As I've said before on the floor, our judges don't have armies, they don't have police forces. The enforceability of their rulings really depends on the credibility and trust that the people of our nation have in them as individuals who put on robes because they are supposed to put aside their personal prejudices and beliefs and fairly, impartially, objectively enforce the law. I fear that these nominees lack those qualities, and that is a tragedy for our nation. Whatever your politic, someday you will be before a judge. Likely, maybe not all, but many of you will. And you will want that judge to look at both sides of the courtroom and say they both have an equal chance to make their case, not tilting it one way or the other because of personal belief. I hope my colleagues will send a message to the President of the United States. You cannot politicize the American judiciary. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.